Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Mondays at Noon. I'm Molly Pepper. I am the Associate Dean here in the School of Business. And this is our weekly forum where we get together and talk about things that are important to us. So we are recording this session and it will be available on the School of Business YouTube channel. Our guest today is Andrew Sorenson. Andrew graduated in 2008. And Andrew, jump in if I get any of this wrong, with a Bachelor of Business Administration with a concentration in MIS and an MBA with a concentration in finance in 2009. And now he works at Nike in Portland. So the Dean will tell you more about Andrew when we get to the interview part of our program. But before we talk to Andrew, we're going to take a moment, pause and reflect, and then engage into networking exercises. So because this is the forum where we gather as a community, I would like us to just take a moment to reflect on that community. This is the week when students begin to return to campus. So I think it's appropriate to just reflect for a moment on our community, for the safe travel for our returning students, and for the success of the coming semester. So please join me in just a moment of reflection on that. Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to hold our breakout groups to allow for some networking. And afterward, I'll introduce the Dean and he'll begin the interview. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for participating in the networking. So I hope you know a few more people in the community. And now I'm going to hand it over to our Dean, Dr. Ken Anderson, to introduce our speaker.
Well, thank you, Molly, and thanks everybody for being here today and joining us. It's our great pleasure to welcome one of our most distinguished alums, 2 times over, both undergraduate and MBA, as Molly mentioned previously, a wonderful supporter of the business school and also of the university. I don't know what the exact title is. You'll have to help me out here, big fella, but you are the lead dog of the Portland Alumni Chapter.
That is true. That is true. They couldn't find anybody else to take it.
Well, fair enough. But really glad to have Andrew here, someone that we've known and loved for years. And he's got a great story and great insights, and thankful he's willing to share those with us today. So to kick it off, going back just a couple years, why choose Gonzaga?
Great question. I think one of the first ones was that it was away from home. You know, mom and dad wouldn't show up on the porch saying, "Hey, we got cookies and food for you." Graduating from Olympia High School, there were so many folks that were looking at Western and Wazoo and UW, relatively local. And I had moved around about every 5-6 years of my life. And so to me, it was more, man, I want to go someplace new. I want to do something different. I want to start new, start fresh. And I remember coming to Gonzaga for the high school basketball camps every year and just was like, man, that's cool. And my mom always loves telling the story of the first time I was on campus and I'm like walking across campus over by where the Knights of Columbus house was. And I'm sitting there going, Mom, do you know who that is? Mom, do you know who that is? She's like, I have no idea. I go, that's Blake Stepp. I was so I was like, oh my gosh, it's like royalty walking on the ground, right? But it was the feel of community in that smaller space where you weren't just a number the way I felt. You were really a person. And, I learned by doing and being challenged. And, I like to sit closer to the front because I knew someone might pick on me and verify whether I did my homework or not. And so I just felt like I was at home. Having an incredible basketball team and being able to, follow basketball like I did, it was just kind of it was the right, I'm away from home, but I'm not gone. My parents aren't going to show up. I appreciated the religious component to the university. I'm a PK kid ×2. So for those of you who don't know what PK stands for, it's a pastor's kid. So both my parents were in ministry for a number of years. So having that religious element was a huge, huge part of it, as well as just the well-rounded full person that the university was trying to teach, as opposed to I'm just trying to pump you through with a particular curriculum and degree, and then you're out. So it was the community, it was the people, that it just fit, it felt right. And it was, when I got the big envelope to tell me, hey, you've made it, as opposed to the little one that said, yeah, you've been put on the wait list. Hey, match made in heaven,
That's a great story. And you brought up another business school alum, Blake Stepp.
Sure.
And I would share with the group that if Andrew indeed saw Blake walking across campus, if he would have gone up and said anything to Blake might have had one or two words to say, right?
Yeah.
Blake was not the most talkative guy in the world.
No.
As an undergraduate. He's gotten a little bit better over the past few years.
Yes.
So academic lessons, life lessons, things you picked up along the way during your time at Gonzaga.
Yeah, for sure. First and foremost, I think one of the things that GU taught me was how to think, how to have an opinion. I felt like because I was being forced to think, I was being forced to read a lot more pages in a textbook than I expected. You almost had to have your own internal fights with, here's what I believed coming in. Do I still believe that now based on what I'm being asked to read or process or think through? I love that forcing you to learn how to think and how to come to a conclusion and how to back it up with, here's what I believe. And the ability to take in different perspectives, the forcing you to ask the right question. That was a lot of stuff that I took away. And by asking all those questions and being challenged, like once you graduate, you're like, wow, okay, I don't feel like I just kind of made it through. I feel like I actually got somewhere. I'm now really ready to take on what's ever next. I think some of the things I didn't realize would be how strong of relationships I would create. The community of GU is just so strong. Like I always joke with people, I went in there knowing 3 or 4 people, and kind of being a little quiet. And by the end of time I graduated like Van Wilder, because I stuck around a little longer, I was high-fiving, fist bumping, the lunch ladies and the janitors and every single person a part of the university that made it what it was. Everyone had a role to play. Everyone had an important part of it, and recognizing that and getting to meet all the people, it was just, the relationships are something I'll never forget. Obviously the journey of, being a student, but also being an athlete, I got to see a lot more of the United States than I ever expected when I went there. And so just the whole journey put together and the people that I was able to share it with, I think that's the part that I had no idea that's what I was getting myself into, but I'd do it all over again and work even harder if I could the next time.
Well, you brought up the hoop thing.
Yeah.
In terms of location, best road trip.
Oh, man.
Stay focused on location.
Oh, yeah. I had never been to NYC, and the 2 times we got to go, we played 2 pretty historic programs during 2 particular famous times for NYC. So it was essentially like my sophomore year, we got to play North Carolina in New York City, and that was pretty incredible based on the fact that we beat North Carolina. Unfortunately, we lost the next game to the team that decided they'd make a Gonzaga-like run, Butler. But then we also played Duke in NYC, and the opportunity to play in Madison Square Garden, people talk about things being old in the States, but if you go to Europe or you go to Asia, and the concept of old is a very, very, very different definition. And so when you're walking through Madison Square Garden, you take this old freight elevator. It's not just a normal, 5 people fit in an elevator. It's a whole freight elevator down. And you're walking through and you're like, this is like gross. And there's dust bunnies everywhere and whatever. But then you're walking down a hall and you see Muhammad Ali pictures on the wall, and you see all the different artists from a music perspective who have performed. And you realize that that dirtiness was the character and the history. And that feeling, that sense of like, oh my goodness, I'm in, Madison Square Garden in New York City. There's not a lot else that can kind of compete with that just location, atmosphere that I got to go to.
Cool. So talk about, you graduated undergrad.
Yeah.
Completed your eligibility with hoops, and then worked on your MBA. Talk about the journey from, or maybe even the course of that year,
Yep.
And then what ultimately led you to Nike.
For sure. Yeah. So my first year, as some of you know, maybe not everybody, I wasn't an athlete my first year. I tried out and was told, kind of give the eyes, look up and down, goes, you're not a Division I athlete. And excuse my French, I'm kind of like, no shit, Sherlock, right? I'm a 6-foot white guy that can't jump. I can't run as fast, but I really, really love this game. And so I was like, okay, I'll keep working at it. And so sophomore year, stars aligned and I was able to make it as a walk-on. But going through that, just again, it was something I wanted to do as part of my education. It was, the extra, it was the privilege. But once I got done, because I didn't play that first year, I had a redshirt year left. And I certainly didn't want to waste an incredible opportunity to kind of have senior night. I didn't want to be done playing ball yet. But I had graduated undergrad and I'm like, well, but I don't really want to go do basket weaving and some of these other courses that are just kind of like what they are. And I was able to get a grad assistant with the MBA program when Ginny Piskel was around and Stacy Chapman, Dr. Weber was there. It was amazing. And so was able to get into that, had to study real quickly for the MBA. Thankfully, I passed the GMAT. I'm not the greatest of test takers. But was able to do that. So I was able to play another year of ball while doing essentially my year of MBA. And when it got to the second half of the MBA, I was very much saying, I don't want to cram myself so busy in also what is the last semester of ball. I want to enjoy the ride. I want to appreciate what I've been doing. I want to enjoy it. And if I was to cram myself with work, in schoolwork, as well as play ball and look for a job at the same time, I just felt like that really wasn't going to work out in my favor. And so I took still a full course load, but I didn't max myself out and kind of push that into summer and fall so that I could really spend more time focusing on, okay, now that I have these degrees, now what do I want to do next? And I think that was a really good decision for me because it allowed me to enjoy my time finishing ball. Then it really allowed me to say, okay, based on everything I want to do, how do I create the right networking opportunities for myself to figure out which role do I want to make? Or where do I want to start? Which company do I want to start at? And Nike had always been one that I wanted to join. And some of you may know John Nakel, who retired a few years ago from Nike, but great Zag as well. And then Greg Bowie was another connection of mine that I remember meeting in Jack and Dan's. Super great individuals who were like, hey, come check out Nike. And I remember just falling in love with just the culture, the environment, the community. I mean, guys, we have intramurals at work. Now, mind you, we don't have that right now, but in normal times we have intramurals. And so for someone who's very sport related, that was a pretty cool draw. But the reality based on what roles were available, that wasn't the opportunity once I was done with my MBA. And so I started in Spokane working at a computer software company called Next IT. Fred Brown and Jeff Brown, and then David Pendergraph was another one that worked there. And so we did human emulation software. And so it was a great opportunity for me as the software background individual, and kind of how my degree is put together is you have the software, you have a little finance, but I'm also very much a people person. And so I felt like working as a business analyst in a computer software company was a great fit because it forced me to get really good at asking the right question understanding what are the real business problems, but then how do I solve that with technology? So I was there for about 3 years or so, still with Nike being the ultimate goal of where I wanted to get to. But at that time, the digital capabilities.com, that was still a growing, right, reality of the business of Nike. And then out of the blue, I got a call. I'm pretty sure I still have the voicemail saved. On my phone, it had just a bunch of zeros. And I didn't think anything of it. At that point, I'm thinking like, it's a fax number calling me. So I had a meeting. I didn't answer it. I answered the voicemail later in the night and realized that it was a recruiter from Nike asking if I was interested in a business analyst role. And of course, here I am thinking, you blew it, right? You're supposed to answer that phone call. And through the next couple of days, I responded a couple of times, didn't hear anything back. Thankfully, the same, a whole bunch of zeros called back, and it was a really incredible opportunity. And from the time I got that phone call to the time I started, it was about 4.5 weeks. It went lightning fast. For as long as I wanted to be at Nike, I always thought that the process would be a little bit slower. And then all of a sudden, wham, bam, here it is. And I've just enjoyed every minute of it. Like I think I told John and Cameron a little earlier, you're going to have bad days anywhere. But having a bad day at Nike, I'll take it. Like I'd rather have that anywhere else. And so it was just kind of this, I knew where I wanted to get to. I didn't necessarily know how. There's always the curveballs, and there's always I'm going to take a step in this direction to continue to advance my professional skill set. So I become a better candidate the next time I interview. And, like I said, the stars aligned, and I've been there now 7.5 years. It's crazy.
It's funny, you mentioned so many good things right there. And one of them I have to chuckle at is when you put John Nakel and retired in kind of the same sentence.
Yeah.
And the audience is probably thinking of, okay, well, there's this 65 or 70-year-old guy who retired from Nike. Nakel is class of 99 or 2000, I think.
Yep.
From Gonzaga, so he's still relatively young.
Yeah.
Another great Zag is on one of our boards here in the business school. Was head of basketball apparel.
Yeah.
For Nike, and then for one reason or another decided to leave that position, and now owns and operates 4 or 5 whiskey bars.
Yeah, there 4 with the hope of creating a 5th. He was so inspired by Jack and Dan's, and he remembers Jack and Dan's of only having the one side. He remembers where the pharmacy was on the other, and the liquor wasn't actually served. And so he felt, I want to create that same environment.
You're dating yourself when you say things like that, by the way.
Yeah, I'm getting up there. I was talking to someone last week, and I was talking about when I was in high school, and I had to add a few years to the number I'm so used to stating, but it's a few more years now.
And the other thing that's interesting about your Nike story, it appears to be on the other end of the continuum from the Zach Peach story.
Yeah.
Right? The legendary Zach Peach, another Gonzaga alum who probably, I'm sure the number has grown over the years with the legend, but I want to say the last number I heard thrown out, 80, 90 informational interviews at Nike to get his position. He's been there ever since and been very successful.
Yes.
So what do you do now?
Every day it changes. Right now, I work in a group called Strategic Manufacturing. It's part of our global sourcing and manufacturing group. And so global sourcing and manufacturing is very much looking at the supply chain kind of networks, the digital technology that supports that, the factories we operate with, the vendors that supply the materials. So it's a very large group. We are focused on the footwear, right? Because we make footwear, apparel, equipment. So we focus on the footwear. We focus on the machines and the processes that are used to make that at our factories. across all of our different types of product, whether it be a basketball shoe, a baseball shoe, a running shoe. So we do a lot of that manufacturing side of footwear, but we're also looking at it from a strategic lens, trying to understand what do we do today? And if we believe that our business is going to grow and we're going to need to make more, then how do we do that? How do we do that not just more efficiently, but how do we do that with a sustainable conscious? How do we do that when we think about cost efficiencies? How do we do that? And you think about all these other macro and microeconomic environments, even which countries might we be operating in the future as things shift? And it's super fun because you're trying to predict what the future might be. But as we all know, 6 months ago, we would never have predicted we'd be in this environment. And so the last 6 months for our world has been gnarly, to say the least, but it's also been an incredible opportunity to kind of take a step back and just learn and try to figure out, like, what do we need to do? Where, what strategies across our business, not just within our world, but our bigger business, how have those shifted that might change what we need to do? And it's, talking about relationships, one of the coolest things about my job, I think, is when we have the opportunity to go visit our partners in Asia and wherever it might be across the globe, just the relationships you can build with them, getting that different set of perspective of how do they live? What's it like in China? What's it like in Shanghai is very different than it might be in a very rural city in China. That might be different than Vietnam or Taiwan. So trying to put all these different things in perspective. My team, we really run kind of our operational process for how we evaluate the technologies that we're investing in. We also look at how do we create the best communication channels of, do you send out a quarterly review? Do you send out what's the right way to communicate the positive progress we make? As well as how do you look at a portfolio and recognize that every business has a portfolio. Every business has to understand it. What do we prioritize? And maybe sometimes the better question is, which are we not going to prioritize? And so when you look at our portfolio, trying to understand, well, what metrics do we even want to use to evaluate and prioritize? Because when you're dealing with a company like us, who's very innovation focused, and that's very much the heart of what we do, every innovator you talk to might feel like their idea is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And so it's really hard to compare every project to the exact same metrics. And so when you look at a portfolio, you got to have a little bit of bets in all these different places. And so it's really fun to kind of sit there and say, how do you ask the right question to prioritize the right work? Which other teams across Nike do you need to partner with and build the right relationships with to make sure that you are successful and you don't feel like you're just doing it on your own? So it's a pretty crazy world we live in. I kind of tell everybody it's kind of like pulling back a slingshot, that the farther you pull that slingshot back, if you're off, you're going to be way off. And so we're having to be really, really smart about, how tight we pull the slingshot and which direction we're pointed to make sure that we're making good decisions for the business going forward for, coming out of COVID, but even, 10 years down the road. So super fun, crazy, and never the same every day.
So this is the position that was going down when you and I had lunch.
Yes.
Last time down in Portland.
Yes.
Yeah. Beaverton.
Yep.
Okay. And I bring that up because you're now in Greg Bowie's org. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So the org that he was responsible for, I would be in his org. Yep.
And Greg is an alum who also on the board of trustees. Wonderful level of commitment to the university and to the business school. But I bring him up because he has one of the coolest titles, at least he did, that I've ever seen. And at one point it was something like, and correct me if you know it different, like Senior Vice President of the Manufacturing Revolution.
Yeah, pretty much it. Yeah. Which was the innovate the next way we manufacture, which is a pretty audacious title.
So you talked about COVID and Nike as an org. What about you personally?
Yeah.
Besides the usual working from home and working out with milk jugs and things like
Because
that.
that's all I can find on the internet right now.
That's right.
So my girlfriend bought me a club fitting, a golf club fitting. For the first time in my life, I'd been using clubs that were about 30 years old. So I bought myself a set of golf clubs because it's about the only sport you can play. And for a guy that wants to play basketball all the time, you can't really play that in a COVID environment. So I'm learning how to hit a golf club. That's been nice to get out and about. I am getting better at just taking walks, you know, in the sense of getting away from a desk. I'm not really a walker. I like to kind of, if I'm going to be outside and I'm going to walk, I might as well sprint a hill, because I figure I can spend less time sprinting that hill and be on to the next thing than just walking around the block. But definitely trying to not allow all the screen time that I think we all experience right now. Is, you know, you might be looking at your cell phone screen or an iPad screen or your computer screen or the TV screen, trying to still get in some good reading, in terms of some books that are, you know, the books I like to read are very entrepreneurial, business minded, things that are very much about the kind of how you think, you know, trying to find different ways to stay engaged without just kind of being the couch potato, I think is very much my goal right now.
So we've got, as Molly mentioned earlier, move-in weekend coming up.
Oh yeah.
We expect roughly 1,000 or so brand new Zags coming to campus, and of course everybody coming back. And it is certainly a different time, and it's a stressful time. But if you can separate that out, what advice would you have for brand new Zags going into when they start to get serious about thinking about a career? What would Andrew want to say to them, or what would Andrew have wanted to know back in the day?
Oh, I still want to know so much, Dr. A. So much to learn. I think for me, it's you start out with just getting involved. I mean, I think that was, you know, as a freshman, especially if you're coming in, you don't really know anybody. You know, there's a lot that do come in knowing some folks from high school, and you're a little bit tentative because, you know, you are on your own. You're trying to figure out, what do I want to do? And you still have a little bit of that, like, high school. Oh, high school is the biggest thing and most important thing in my life. But you realize really quickly, you know, in college, the high school isn't the biggest thing, right? And so I think for me, it's get involved, challenge yourself, right? Force yourself to have an opinion. You know, make friends with everyone around you, because the reality is you might not know that your dorm mate is going to go start the next multi-million-dollar business. You know, that's very much a reality, and that GU is such a relationship-driven culture that you just don't know. You almost assume that, well, he's just my college, you know, buddy. But, you know, 10 years, 20 years from now, he might be that college buddy of yours. You're like, dude, can I get a job? Or, hey, can I work for you? So I think just the idea of just, you know, be kind to everybody. You know, don't take anything for granted. Something I definitely always looked at when it came to sports was, you know, don't ever let yourself say what if. If you want to try something, if you want to go for something, go for it. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But if you want it, keep going, right? Don't let yourself be so easily defeated. And I think that's, you know, that just comes with time and confidence and figuring it out. But I think GU prepares you for that. It forces you to have a perspective. And I think if you're open to being challenged, to being forced to have an opinion, where the teacher might call on you, even if you're not expecting it, and you're expected to have an opinion, that teacher is not going to tell you what the right answer is. But that teacher is certainly going to make sure that you come to some sort of conclusion that you feel like you can back up. And so if you are ready for that challenge, if you go in saying, I'm going to come out of here better, man, wherever that ending is, it's going to be so much greater than if you approach it with some tentativeness or unsuredness, or I just don't, you know, I'm uncomfortable. If you walk in there and say, let's go, I'm going to swing for the fences, and wherever I land, I'm going to land. I just feel like you're going to get so much more out of it, because GU is certainly a place where what you put in is what you'll get out. How'd that go?
That was great. That was good. Okay. Well, let's see. Let's go with this question from the chat for you. And Molly had a similar question earlier. I mean, as you know, Andrew, even back in the day, I mean, Nike is a dream destination for a lot of our students.
For sure.
It's an extremely difficult organization traditionally to get into.
Yeah.
Although I think we are getting close to 100 Zags at Nike.
We continue to grow. Using the Bowie math, we continue to grow.
Yeah, that's right. So the question, if a student dreams of working for a place like Nike, some ways they can increase their chances of getting a job there.
Yeah, good question. A lot of times people say, you know, and I got it a bunch of times, you know, why do you want to work for Nike? And you'll hear a lot of times, well, I love sports. You're going to have to do better than that, right? You can't just love sports and say, I want to work at Nike, right? We, you know, to the point of we are incredibly competitive. You know, being as big of a brand as we are, as global as we are, we have an incredible set of diverse talent that applies from literally every corner of the planet that wants to do something. And I think, you know, in early days of Nike, you could apply for a role and you might have 25 roles in 25 years, kind of like a Greg Bowie. But as we've gotten as big as we are, we tend to look for some more specific skill sets that fill a gap on a particular team. Because Nike, while you might say, oh, you're just a footwear company, but we have an entire .com business. We are in manufacturing. We have an entire accounting pipeline within our company. So we are, in many ways, in industries upon industries because of how big we are, right? Brand marketing is a massive, massive thing in what we do. You know when you see a Nike commercial or an Apple commercial or a Coca-Cola commercial. And so I think one of the most important things for someone to do when they say, I want to work at Nike, is there's a little bit of that. You have to ask some really good questions to say, where do I think I want to start? Because a lot of times if you say, I want to work at Nike, someone will say, okay, well, you know, what do you want to do? And you'll get the, well, I'll do anything because it's Nike. I'll do anything. And then other people are like, I want to be the vice president of sports marketing. Well, the answer to both of those is, well, if you want to be the vice president of sports marketing for NCAA college basketball, there's been one guy doing that for 30 years. So you and about 100,000 people want that job. So good luck. But don't let me stump on your dream. And if you're willing to do anything, are you willing to work for free? And so I think there's this almost like you want to keep and make sure that people have a goal or where they want to get to, right? And not stamp out the dream, but you also want to give them a sense of reality that is like, well, eventually you are going to have to pay back student loans. And so you're going to want an income to pay for that. And so trying to think through, you know, not necessarily what is always the dream job, but what are the things that you want to do that create the best set of skills for yourself to be ready for that dream job. So if you want to be in sports marketing, then how can we get you part of events? Or can we get you working in some of our category teams that's a little bit more focused on product? And so you try to almost break down what Nike is to better understand what are all the pieces and the groups. Because I'll tell you, the environment and the culture of our skateboarding group is a very different environment than our yoga group, which is very different than women's running. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's important to understand that if you want to work in one of these groups, it's important to be asking really good questions, just as the company is going to be asking you questions when they're interviewing you. And so it's always trying to figure out what is the background that you have to bring to the table that tells a story that articulates why you are absolutely the best person for this role. And I always tell people, just because Nike's not the first job doesn't mean Nike's impossible anymore, right? You don't have to start at Nike to work at Nike. Sometimes we end up taking people that have different backgrounds because that might be the skill set and the role that we need. And so I think there's always this sense of practice persistence. And if this is where you want to be, keep at it. But you also got to be patient, because if there's a particular role you want and you're not getting it, you can get really frustrated and really burnt out. And, in some ways you get just mad and you say, fine, I don't want to work there anymore. And so, I always try to work with people to say, what are your skill sets? What do you like doing? What do you not like doing? And on either of those, what you like doing or what you don't like doing, what are you good at and what are you not good at? Because you might recognize that there's something that you really like doing and you're really good at it. Use that as a really important professional pillar to be something you can represent yourself at every time you apply for a job. On the other side, if there's something you're not good at, but it might be an impediment to you advancing professionally, then how do we focus training on that? Maybe it's program or project management. How do I go take a course, or what are other jobs I can do that allow me to increase that? And so it's a lot of what we do is try to dispel the myth that is Nike because of how large it is, and try to point you on a path of saying, where do you want to start? Because once you get into Nike, the opportunity to create the same types of really strong relationships that Gonzaga prepares you for, it's there, because it's such a people-oriented company. And then by creating and meeting more people and creating those relationships, you might have other opportunities from a professional perspective to advance throughout the company. But that first job can be really hard if, again, you're coming in and just saying, I just love sports. It makes it a really, really difficult jump.
Cool. Last question from Dr. Kerpus.
Oh boy.
It's in the chat, but I love the ending of the question. How Nike's so big, been around for a while. How does it avoid becoming a monument to itself? In other words, something that's obsolete. What do you see some of the things that Nike does as an org?
For sure. So I think you have to look and go back a little bit to our history to understand, why are we as big of a business as we are? And we started with it. And if anyone is super interested in Nike, cares about it, Shoe Dog. It was the book that Phil Knight wrote. And it is equally an impressive, like almost one would say an autobiography, but it's truly an entrepreneurial book that talks about essentially the number of times that Nike should have failed, but the persistence to keep moving on. And I think that kind of encapsulates who started Nike. This relentless, I will not quit. I am here to represent the athlete. Sports ideally isn't going anywhere. It might, based on COVID, be shifting and how we do it. But the idea is that our company, we serve athletes. Now, as we've grown and gotten bigger, right, we've added other sports because running was where we started. We've added other sports, which, again, sometimes you have to prioritize and say, what, cricket might be big in India, but maybe it's not the right place to go as a business. Right or wrong, who knows if that's even the conversation we're having. But I think one of the things we have to keep thinking about is we have to keep evolving. And right now we're going through a major evolution to say, how does digital become a much, much bigger part of how we just do business? Because if we're not connected digitally, if we're not enabled to connect to our consumers digitally, then we're not serving our consumers. It doesn't matter how cool of a shoe we make. If we can't actually connect to our consumers, the athletes, or sell that product, then it really doesn't matter. And so I think we're going through a lot of questions in our world around, what does digital mean? Where do we put the investments? Do we shrink maybe this area of the business to grow it here? But we have to stay focused to our core competency is that consumer relationship, building the product for the consumer, and how we do that is always going to be are we willing to adapt and change, or are we too stubborn and set in our ways to say, that's not how we do it. That's not what got us here. Well, if what we keep saying is, well, we have to keep going to the well and do the thing the same way, that will make us the monument that now all of a sudden we're not advancing. we think that from a supply chain and manufacturing perspective, that world is a huge, huge unlock. I think the way we look at Nike as a business is you say, first and foremost, we're a brand, right? Because of the way our commercials are, who we represent, how we are seen globally. Brand first and foremost. Second, we make, and I'm totally biased, but the greatest product in the world, right? And then third, we talk about this ability to be a industry leading supply chain, which that is a massive grouping of all kinds of things that require, if you think about sustainability and you think about climate change and these predictions that Vietnam is going to be half underwater in 30 years. Well, if we're manufacturing in Vietnam, holy moly, like where does that come in the strategy of Nike on a supply chain side to say, well, we certainly don't want our factories to be underwater. And so I think we are always having to stay so far ahead because we've gotten so big. But some of you may have read the news about Nike right now. We are certainly going through some shifts. Mark Parker, about a year ago, announced he was stepping down. John Donahoe, who is now the new CEO, I think says a lot about where our company is looking and pointing to from a strategic direction perspective, that he's coming from ServiceNow. If you look at the majority of our CEOs, they've all had Nike, blue blood experience in the sense they've been around forever. But John Donahoe is the new guy. Now he's been on our board for a number of years, so he understands Nike. He's not just completely fresh, but his digital background is clearly hey, we gotta become more digitally enabled. We have to utilize digital to continue moving forward. And so it's interesting to see how, someone who's been at Nike for 30 years, or we've even had people that have been there for 40, it's very different in the way that we know we need to do things for Nike to keep growing the next 40 years, as opposed to the last 40 years. So I think to be honest, we're right at that point where we're being forced to make some of these decisions so that we don't just kind of, oh, well, that was Nike, cool. And in the grand scheme of things, it was just a flash in the pan. We see that we still provide service to athletes. I think another thing we got to look at is that concept of an athlete, right? If you know our mission statement that has an asterisk that an athlete is anyone with a body, you're an athlete. That concept of who we serve has to expand. It can't just be that we make product for Tiger Woods or LeBron James or, Kobe Bryant or, Sue Bird or Elena Delle Donne. It can't be that. We have to be able to find ways to create access to sport and serve the consumer where they're at and what they need, without totally changing the business. And it's, growing pains like anybody. We continue to say we're a growth company, which I think just adds more stress to our lives. But, it's a lot of type A personalities and there is no finish line, as Phil Knight would say. So it's exciting. It is never the same and it is constant change. But I think, it's a great question because I think a lot of companies are being forced to ask themselves, I don't want COVID to be the downfall. I don't want COVID to be the reason we can't make the right decisions going forward. And thankfully we're in a pretty healthy position financially and just as a business that we can make some of those decisions we need to stay relevant now and use COVID as the opportunity versus COVID is forcing us to make these changes. It's expedited our reality to meet certain, business objectives earlier than we expected, which allows us to change the direction of strategy and get to where we know we got to get to, which I think keeps us on the forefront as opposed to kind of behind the eight ball.
Great answer.
Thank you.
Great answer.
Of course. Yeah.
Well, Andrew, buddy, thank you for taking the time.
You bet.
To visit with us today. It was educational and entertaining, as always.
Of course.
So good to see you. Stay safe, be well, take care of those loved ones, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me all. Great to see so many faces I haven't seen in a while.
Take care, everybody.
See you guys.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, you bet. See ya.